so I'm going to start this again, and all right, let's do the next section here. So, so live data collection. We talked about it a lot before. This is what you mostly want to do. So you're trying to preserve evidence. That's what. So you have it for later, but you're not getting every bit of data on the machine. You're trying to get a reasonable amount of data. So you're getting things like log files, registry keys, a list of all the files with dates, and so on. So you're trying to decide, you want volatile data is probably the most important thing. Volatile data is data that will vanish when you shut the machine down. Things like network connections and running processes. And that is probably what you want because that's the running malware that's currently infecting your system. So you want some kind of live response that will not burden the system too much. And you want to make sure you get a reasonable amount of data, not an overwhelming amount of data for these. And so then you have to consider the legal consequences. Like that one where there was a large money transfer from the CFO, they wanted a full image of the CFO's hard drive because that one machine might really be important in court. And then it's worth collecting all the data. But if you're doing 10,000 machines trying to find out how many are infected on your enterprise, then you don't want to do a full image of every machine. So you have to make a reasonable judgment call of how much data to collect from each machine. So here's the risks. First, test and make sure, test it on some simple machine like an unimportant one or a virtual machine copy because you want to make sure that it doesn't crash the machine and that it doesn't burden it too much and that it actually gets the data you want. And then consider, make sure you have approval because of course anything like this might cause unexpected consequences like corrupt some data, bring down a business process or something. So all live responses are considered sloppy and dangerous in the world of forensics, although we're all going to get used to it because a live response changes the system. You are running a process on the machine you're investigating, and so some of the data you collect is data you put there, and some of the data you collect is data that was altered by your collection process. So that's not very pure and clean, but that is what you must do. So just like people who analyze blood splatters or who cut into dead bodies, they are aware that their investigation technique changes the evidence and they have to be able to go to court and say, I found this and here's what I put on this. And the thing I found is not something I put there, it's something that the bad guy put there. And you just have to be enough of an expert to make that decision, that discrimination. And it's not as clean as dead disk forensics, where you say, I made an image of the disk and 100% of that data was put there by someone else. I didn't change anything in the process of collection. That's an option with imaging hard drives and machines that are turned off, but it is not an option when collecting data from live systems. So you can make your homegrown tool, which is certainly what I found to be the best. Just write your own script in something like Bash or PowerShell or DOS that runs some commands like task list and gets the information you want. There are commercial products, and the free ones I found have been terrible. I haven't found any that actually work. It's better to just write your own script in my experience. So anyway, you consider if you have a accepted forensic tool. I'm not aware of a standard accepted forensic tool for live response, just for the older stuff like Encase for hard drive forensics. Make sure that it actually runs on the operating system. Obviously, you're going to need a different one for Linux and Windows. And make sure, by the way, if you use OS commands, if you're going to run commands on the machine like task list and so on, then you ought to actually bring those in with your tool, because if the machine is infected with malware, it might have Trojan copies of those system binaries. So you should not use the copy of like dir from the machine you're inspecting. You should bring in your own copy of a good dir and so on. So, all right, so collect the data that's important to have, make sure that it doesn't take too long, like less than an hour per system, and make sure that you can understand the report. And so you want to collect the current running state, network connections, running processes, a list of the files on the machine, the system logs. Those are usually the high priority things to get. And all right, if you always get the whole contents of RAM or the whole hard drive, then you're usually just digging yourself in a hole by piling up too much data to analyze. So there's no point collecting stuff that you can't analyze quickly enough to do any good. Anyway, so where you want system time and date, including the time zone, operating system, memory capacity, hard drives, mounted file systems, all this good stuff. This is the kind of stuff, general fingerprint of the system as much as possible. User accounts and group membership are important because it's very common that the attacker has created extra user accounts or promoted people to administrator that shouldn't have been there, and you'll want to know that happened. This is when we're doing CCDC. They're always saying, give us a list of all the user accounts, give us a list of all the machines, find suspicious processes running on your machine. This is a routine activity you should get good at. And so everything about the networking, network connections in progress, and MAC address caches to show what systems it's recently been connected to. All those may be important. And of course, all the loaded drivers and modules and running processes, login history, authentication logs, software, antivirus logs, the whole file system, listing of all the files, because you're going to want to have that and then compare it to a clean system and find the unexpected new files and so on. A complete RAM capture is an option, although in this class we just went down to capturing one process because even with cloud server we had so much trouble. In previous semesters when we were using virtual machines, I captured the whole RAM and then digged through it, and it became more and more burdensome as RAM got bigger and bigger. And I learned the same thing your textbook talks about, that this whole RAM capture is almost as problematic as a whole disk capture. It's fairly easy to do, but once you've got all that, it is too much junk to wade through. So this is something you do only if you really need to make a complete record because you're hoping to go to court with that system, not a routine process for every machine. Yeah.
This side question, is it depends on what kind of data you're looking for?
Well, I suppose it could. But the only reason you capture all of RAM is because you don't even know what you're looking for. And you want to make sure you got it all. So it can be examined later in great detail. Typically, the thing to do in incident response is plan what to look for. That's why the first thing you do is find indicators of compromise, and then you look for them. So it's you cannot do a targeted live response without knowing what you're looking for. The only thing you can do, other than looking for specific indicators of compromise, is general things like this. You know, all installed software, all running processes, and things like that. Just try to do a fingerprint of the system. One tool that is similar for this is Hijack This. I should mention this is an old tool to get rid of malware. If you're infected with malware and it's not recognized by antivirus or something, you can use Hijack This. And there it is. And what Hijack This does is it just fingerprints your machine. You run this thing and it gives you, let's see if I can find somebody with demonstration. I used to give students this. If your machine is infected by something, Hijack This will just list all the running processes, all the registry keys, and so on. Just make a big text file of all the stuff about the currently running processes, and then you can feed it up to a website, and they'll tell you if there's recognized malware. You recognize the name of process, the name of files, the name of keys in certain registry locations. It's very much like a live response. In fact, maybe I'll throw it in this class. The Hijack This tool is a simple example of a type of live response for the specific reason of finding malware. And it's, so that's the thought. In fact, I'm going to put it here to consider that for a project. If that's still around, that's actually a very good example of a generic way to get some kind of fingerprint of a system, which will usually let you discover malware, even if that malware is not known yet. Anyway, all right. So you practice on a test system first, of course, make sure that things are going to work. Consider the problems like a broken USB port, the NIC not working, a locked screen. How are you going to handle these issues? And so the machine you're examining may be infected with malware, so anything you plug in might get infected too, and be aware of that. This is a fundamental rule of all forensic analysis, that the machine you've imaged might be infected, and so the tools you use and the machines you run them on should be isolated. You should be aware that you might infect your analysis machine with the malware you're studying, and that'll be a big deal in the next couple of projects, which I'll talk about next time. So document whatever you do, document it. You always have to make things up. You always make mistakes. Make sure you have a complete record of what you did, because they may decide later that you did something wrong and destroyed the evidence, and that will need to be understood. So, and remember, like I was saying, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. Don't lie about anything you did. Don't cover it up. I did this, I did that, I did that. Then I realized I shouldn't have done that, so I did this. Keep it all. Don't try to hide anything. Record what you really did. Telling the truth is always going to be best. Anyway, the suspect computer should be hot. Don't mess around with it. Connect to it as little as possible, and use tools that do have the minimum impact on it. So you typically use command line tools and scripts. GUI-based tools just cause more damage to the target system for no good reason. And it's a good idea to create cryptographic checksums of the data you recover so you can verify that copies of it are accurate. So you automate everything would be the best thing. Have some automatic scripts so you don't change anything while it's running. Try to collect the most volatile data first, like network connections and caches that are going to time out. Yeah?
You look at the cryptographic checks of what? Your data?
Yeah, your data, and perhaps files you're copying and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you worry about somehow, after you look at it, your data got changed?
Well, yeah, here they're thinking about tools that calculate a cryptographic checksum right away is best. But it's a good idea to have checksums of whatever you create so you can tell if it's been altered later, either your copy or the original. Of course, originally, this was hard drive forensics. You'd have an MD5 hash that was perfect. In live response, that's not that clear. And you remember, you've been doing that Spunk project where you're looking at the MD5 hashes of executables and SHA-1 hashes and SHA-256 hashes. So you see what they can do. And it is sort of complicated, but if you're running Sysmon, like we were in that Spunk tool, it actually calculates the SHA-1 hash of every executable when it launches and logs it. So you can tell if the file gets modified and launched again later with a different hash. And that's an automatically created hash value that turns out to be very important. All right, so you should have data preservation process now. You should record that when you collected it and then put it somewhere safe, like a locked drawer or room or something, because this is now a chain of custody. This might eventually end up in court, so you'll have to have an unbroken chain of custody. You can't just stick it on your laptop and then leave the laptop alone and let people mess with it and then go to court later, because you won't be able to say you made sure that nobody messed with the evidence. So, and anything you connect to it should not have any information that would help the attacker, because the attacker might be copying all the files off your thumb drive that you're connecting to the machine. So that's an important issue. This is why in CCDC, one of the capital mistakes people make, they're protecting a network, the machines are under hostile control, then they change their password. Well, I got a keylogger running on your machine, I get your new password, and the same thing will happen to you here. If you just do anything while connected to that machine, you're handing that over to the bad guy, so it's a thing to be aware of. So, and at the same time, of course, credentials you use in the process are all compromised. So don't do anything you don't have to, like storing the analysis kit on the suspect machine. And don't just log into the suspect machine, go to the desktop and start typing in commands trying to figure out what happens. This is what amateurs do. They say, gee, something's wrong with my machine. So here, let me get on there. Let me put myself to administrator. Let me run this tool, run that tool. Now, that's what you do for normal tech support. But all you're doing is destroying evidence by doing all that. So it's if you actually have an incident, you're going through an instant evidence collection process, you shouldn't be just exploring on the system. You should be running some prepared script that does a standard collection. Yeah?
When somebody's hacking you right now, at the same time you mentioned earlier,
yeah.
If you were to disconnect the power, would they able to get some stuff at all?
If you disconnect the power, it won't do any good, but if you disconnect the network, that would stop it.
Why is just disconnect the power?
Well, if you disconnect the power and it's a desktop machine and it goes down, that would do it too, yeah. But if you crash the machine, so it's not running anymore, then yeah, that would protect it. Disconnecting the network is usually a gentler way to do it, or like putting a phone in airplane mode.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then one more thing is when somebody's hacking you, you want to cut their RAMs. What's the process of cutting the RAMs?
Oh, okay.
On the RAMs.
Well, everything that's currently running on the machine is in RAM. So if I steal the RAM, I could find your credit card numbers and everything in it. So an attacker could make a RAM image to steal data, but when they stole the credit card numbers from Target, they did not do that. They followed modern instant response techniques for the same reason. They wanted the credit card numbers. They did not want 4 gigabytes of RAM from each machine. So they wrote a script that would steal just the credit card numbers from RAM and then send that back. And that's what you do with live response. You don't just copy all of RAM, you pick out the parts you're interested in, like the list of running processes, and send that back. Imaging all of RAM is just something you do to make a good copy of evidence that can be investigated later.
So what if you are like the user and somebody's trying to hack you and you also delete everything off your RAMs?
Yeah.
Will they be able to access it again? Or
yes, probably. Because well, if they're currently controlling your machine, and you terminate all processes by like turning off the power, then they lose control. But usually they infect you with persistent malware, which will automatically launch again because they put it in the registry keys like the run key. So turning off your machine stops the attack in progress, but probably when you turn it back on, you'll be under control again. That's the problem.
No, I'm talking about the RAM. If you clean up the RAM on your computers like daily.
Well, there is, how do you clean the RAM? I don't think there is any way to clean the RAM.
You remember cleaning like the application that you clean all your history and everything.
Oh, you can delete internet browser history, but that usually won't do anything. All that will do is destroy the evidence. That won't stop an attack in progress. The attack in progress is actually a running process on your machine like TeamViewer that's giving someone control of your machine, and you'd have to terminate that process. There is no way to clean the RAM on a running machine. The RAM is in use. The only way to make the RAM clean is to turn off the machine, turn off the power, then the RAM will go to zero. These are good questions. All right, so anyway, here's some horror stories. Here's someone who would copy the whole toolkit to the affected system, then collect the data and store it on that system, and then dump the file down. Now, this is something a tech support person might do to make it faster, and this is very much like the phone apps, like the University of Houston app I talk about, where rather than having you log in and sending data to the server, it just dumps the whole database and puts it on the phone, so it's all right there to work with. This is the handiest way to get the job done, but it does involve exposing it. So this is a common thing people do, just don't understand what's going on. They're damaging the system. They're storing the data on a compromised system using compromised system images to make it. You know, this is kind of ridiculous. The other thing you do is remotely log into the domain administrator account and then run a bunch of tools. Now you've exposed the domain administrator credentials, and you're using local tools that might be compromised and rootkitted to get the information. And of course, the old-fashioned technique, which was the standard technique in the days of Windows 98, pull out the plug, crash the system, and image the hard drive. That's it. That's the old-fashioned way of getting forensic images. Until about 10 years ago, this is what they told you to do. Don't shut it down, because the shutdown processes might include erasing evidence and stuff. Just pull the plug and image the hard drive. Whatever's in RAM does not matter, because things in RAM don't have owners and timestamps, so who cares? All we want is the files, and then we can find out which logged in user did something at what time. And that was the standard of computer forensics 10 or 15 years ago. But live response is the modern way, where you need what's in RAM anyway. And we've accepted it's not enough to get just the evidence you can get perfectly. We need the evidence that is more hard to get and less perfect, that contains what we need to know.
Yes, I thought it was like, you know, like in the movies, like people disconnected the powers and everything.
Well, you can, well, of course, on laptops, you disconnect the power. It doesn't matter at all, because they still run. That's what most people have. On a desk, that's just the old technique, though. You would pull out the plug and image the hard drive. That's what you did in the days of Windows 98, because the only thing you want is the hard drive, and you want to image it with the power off so that you don't change anything. Then you connect it through a write blocker, you turn on the power, and you image it without changing anything. That's the old-fashioned technique. It's not enough these days for instant response. So here's good techniques. You have like a network share on the file server, not part of any domain. Use throwaway credentials that you don't use for any other purpose. And now you have a read-only folder with the live response toolkit, including all the binaries, and then you have a writable place. So you run all your tools from the network share from known good copies, and you save the data to a network share. This is where you have the minimal effect on the system, and you don't trust anything on that system. And you don't deliver any data to that system that you aren't willing to lose. Yeah?
Would you worry about when you write the output, you also some other malware also got to?
Yes. Whatever system you get to might possibly get infected. So the machine that has this share, you might infect it. So it should be something you use only for analysis that doesn't have any other crucial data on it.
If they don't, you have to check your system also?
Yes, you do. And by the way, that's one of like the 10 base practices. You should always scan your analysis machine for viruses. But you also have to be aware that that's not perfect. There's plenty of things that antivirus doesn't catch. So you're very likely going to have live dangerous malware in your analysis system. And that's why you work in isolation on machines that you can just wipe clean when you're done with them. Or you work on, say, Linux machines with Windows malware, things like that to protect you.
A run on good CD.
Yeah, that would be good, but you do need to write something, right? Here you actually need to make a copy of data from the system, which is perhaps malicious. So it's a thing to be aware of.
Stick it on USB drive.
Well, that's actually problematic, because USB drives are two ways. And if you plug that in another machine, you might be carrying an infection over, like Stuxnet. So these techniques can be done, but you have to be aware of the risk. You are certainly collecting some data from an infected system, and now that data is suspect. So you shouldn't just go plugging it in random systems. You should only plug it in systems that you're willing to compromise. That's why you have to malware analysis machines that you're willing to get infected, because you're just willing to wipe them clean after you're done. So you browse to the share, you run the live response directly from the share and specify the output to the share, so you don't write any unnecessary files on the local hard drive. And once you're done, you move the live response data from that share to some place where it's permanently stored for analysis. So you air gap the evidence server. The evidence server should not be on the internet, not on the LAN. It should be disconnected from all networks, so you know that it's not changing while you're running it. And you audit access to the evidence server, and try to use an automated process as much as possible so you do every investigation the same way consistently, and you run it as a local administrator. So some computers can't have any external media for various reasons, and so you might put your toolkit on a CD-ROM or a USB or a network share or something. You might send it over the network with an encrypted network connection. There's a bunch of ways to do that. If you have a goofy OS somewhere in your network, like some IoT device running VxWorks or something, which a lot of us do, then you may very well not be able to use your standard toolkit. You have to have a special one for that system. The VxWorks is all over the news now. VxWorks is in a lot of high-end routers, and it's been a proprietary system, and it was considered secure, but nobody ever tested it. And recently somebody finally did a binary analysis and found all these god-awful security problems in it. So like all IoT devices, it's got problems, and of course it won't run any of the usual software you expect, so doing anything with it is difficult. Yeah?
IoT is the little chip thing?
Yeah, IoT devices, Internet of Things, are typically very small, and they often use strange operating systems. The most common thing is highly stripped down versions of Linux, like routers run, but they often use old operating systems that were never used for anything else. And sometimes even proprietary operating systems. So they often don't have the usual toolkit you need. And that's why sometimes people, if you like find old goofy devices on the crime scene, they actually have to contact like network, like enthusiast clubs, like Amiga lovers or something, that will know how to get into that thing. You often have to go to the amateur or like hacking community to find somebody that can cope with your bizarre old device. I remember I went to DEF CON a few years ago and they had an old PDP-8 mainframe that they actually booted up, and they had the aprons from the original like DEC, and they set up a data center like from 1981 with the original stuff running in there. You could go play on it. There are these old, long dead systems that only some people even know about. And there was in their Capture the Flag contest, they had a challenge called 42. It was a file that was zipped 42 times with different zip algorithms. And I got like the first 8 of them, and then they were zip algorithms from like the 1970s from long dead systems. Their data compression has been around for a long time, and a lot of it is horrible and old. And they found 42 different compression algorithms. I didn't make it to the end. Anyway, so you should have a checklist of all your steps. Make sure you know your command line options for the tools you're using, and have a standard procedure as much as possible. It's best if it's just an automated process. You always have to have some problems and overcome them, but the more automated and regular it is, the more likely you'll actually do every step right. And the most important thing is keep complete logs of what you did, because this may go to court, and then there will be an argument. Did you really do this right, or did you do it wrong and get the right answer? And you'll have to have a record of exactly what you did so people can decide whether you did it right or not. So we'll go to the Kahoots, and that'll be it for today. We'll do the next section next time. So this is 7A.
Maximum is 6 digits.
I think I might have seen 7. Considering this is 800,000, it seems like it might go over a million sometimes. There was a Kahoot vulnerability. No, it was a Zoom vulnerability. They found a way to enumerate Zoom. Apparently the Zoom has a number like that, and it's not really random enough. And they found a way to enumerate them all so you can find Zoom sessions and crash in. And Zoom said they were going to change the software so it always requires a password to get in. And I thought that would be annoying, but it didn't happen to me yet. But I haven't put on the latest update. So I think if I update my Zoom, it's going to make there be a password on there, and that'll be irritating. But anyway, in principle, you can find open Zoom sessions and connect to them, just like you can find open. That would be a good plan, because often the updates are irritating, and I'd rather just use the old version, because what security do I need on Zoom? This is a public class, everybody can connect. Anyway. Oh no, Kirk is here. Yes, that's true. All right.
Someone just did that as a joke.
Yes, somebody's always saying I'm not Kirk or I am Kirk or something. You're famous.
Yeah, right.
So,
Okay, Kurt.
so the suspect reinstalled the OS to hide evidence. This really happened. I don't know why it's small today. I don't know how to make it bigger. it's bigger now. I'll tell you about this. These are mostly real incidents. All right. This is okay. This really happened. One of my forensic examiners told me about this. A person had done something bad on their laptop, and then he came to them with a court order saying, "I demand that laptop." And they said, "I'm sorry, I sold that laptop to my lawyer, who then reinstalled Windows. So that's we accidentally destroyed the evidence, and you can't have it." And he said, "That's fine. I want it anyway. I'll have no trouble getting the evidence off it." And then they panicked and just settled the case, because they were not aware that reinstalling Windows doesn't do anything. The old files are still there. However, what reinstalling Windows does do is they are no longer in the active file system. So you cannot collect them with live response, and they're not running processes. You have to get a complete disk image, and then you recover deleted files from the unused sectors. And that is what the old-fashioned encase type forensics does. But if you reinstall the OS, a disk is like 500 gigs. The OS is only like 10 gigs. Reinstalling the OS only overwrites 10 gigs of stuff. So most of the old data is still there. And
if you completely reformat it and zero out.
Well, those are two separate things. If you reformat it, it does absolutely nothing, and all the old data is still there. If you zero it out, that takes hours, and you have to use disk part and clean all, or run a tool called erasure.
Boot nuke.
Or boot and nuke. These are tools that will do it. Then it's really gone. But most deleting does not zero it out. And most people don't know this. They think when you drag it in the trash can and empty the trash can, it's gone. And it's not gone at all. And there's been tools like Norton Undeleter. Many tools will bring it back. It's really still on the hard drive. And doing something like reformatting or reinstalling the OS does not clean it. It just makes it a little hard to find. But a professional forensic tool can still get it off.
Is it like the mechanicals, is sector by sector, but
That's right.
But on SSD is a little bit harder because of the cells.
This is actually a really important issue. SSDs are very different. The way SSDs are designed, it turns out that leaving the old data on them is bad for performance. So most SSDs have a garbage collection process that actually does zero out the empty sectors and delete almost all the data within a few seconds. But some SSDs are running in an old mode where that process does not happen. So sometimes SSDs have all this deleted stuff, but most of the time it's gone. That's why when SSDs came out, people freaked and said this will be the end of computer forensics. And it was kind of the end of this technique of getting old deleted files. With SSDs, you're much less likely to succeed at that. However, what came to replace it is the modern forensics of live forensics, where you don't need to get the deleted files. You look at the live stuff and you can still learn a lot. But SSDs are a lot closer to what normal people expect. When you delete a file, it should just be gone. That is more or less true on an SSD. Anyway.
One question before you move forward.
Yeah.
I choose the green one. How come I'm wrong?
The green one is right. You shouldn't be wrong. That's the red one.
No, I choose the square one.
Well, I don't know.
It's the right one.
I don't know, but the green is definitely right. Yeah.
Why would the data left on the SSD will slow down the?
Oh, because SSDs have blocks of data that are 640 kilobytes, and it has to allocate a whole block at once to store a new file, and it can only allocate a block if it's empty. So if you leave the old data on there, all the blocks are full. So when you try to save a new file, yeah, it's like fragmentation. See, if you stored the old data on an SSD, and the deleted files that didn't erase it like you do on a hard drive, then when you tried to store new data, it would have to clean a whole block to make room for it, and that's slow. So what it does is when you delete a file, it marks it as no longer used, and then while you're not doing anything, in the background, garbage collection cleans out the blocks, so they're empty for future use. Otherwise, saving data would be really slow. So it has to prepare the drive by cleaning up the unused sectors, and also doing like a defragmentation procedure to take the little sections and combine them into one sector to make completely unused blocks to delete them. Because you have to have, because deleting a block takes a long time. And you must, see, a hard drive, you can just write on top of old data. But an SSD, you must first erase it before you write. That's the fundamental problem. And you can't erase a small part of it. You can only erase a big chunk, and that takes a long time. So performance of SSDs will go down unless you have garbage collection. However, this is what they tell you, but in practice, people tested it with phones and modern SSDs, and they couldn't see any significant slowdown without bothering to do garbage collection. So it sounds good, but apparently it's not as important as they say. However, most modern devices do have garbage collection turned on. I demonstrated this at DEF CON, which is kind of fun.
One more question.
Yeah.
When you do a hard drive, this image erase everything is taking like sometimes it's very out, take like
Takes hours.
no, I don't mean like 48 hours.
When I did it,
How you do like
I did it, it depends on the speed of your drive and speed of your processor, but when I did it on, say, 500 gig drives in the lab a few years ago, it took about 2 hours per station.
I know, but there's a software to do it, make it go faster.
No, there's no way to make it faster because the drive can only write at a certain speed. And you have to write to every sector on the drive. That's what limits you.
So basically zeroing out, taking, right now they don't have like a gigabyte, now they have like terabytes.
I know. So,
Right now they
but of
have
course
like-
they're getting faster too. So I would think, technically it'll depend on your hardware, but I would think 2 or 3 hours is probably all it would take.
No, basically when I checked my last time, it's like around 2 gigabytes, terabytes, basically around 14 hours.
14 hours to zero? Wow, that's rude.
0 hours.
Yeah. I didn't
Right now
know.
they have like
Yeah.
16 terabytes hard drive.
Yep. And unless it writes a lot faster, it'd take even longer to erase. Yeah, that's why.
Convert it first. Convert it from standard to GPT and then also to exFAT. You convert it a couple times and then it might fit. What result would you get?
I would suspect that it doesn't matter what file system it has, but I haven't tested it. It might be that one is faster than another. Yeah.
So when SSDs zero out space that's being unused, doesn't that mean that the SSDs have to be aware of the file system on top of it?
It does, and that's why there's a special, if you have an old operating system, it's not aware. New operating systems do have a special protocol where the SSD driver is informed when you delete a file for this reason. Because hard drives do not know files have been deleted. They're dumb. Only the operating system knows. SSDs need to know, and there's a special protocol just for that. I gave it a DEF CON talk a couple of years ago. I had more of the details. I wrote a tool on my Mac so I could watch the data evaporate from the Mac. It was pretty cool. In Mac, it takes about 1 second. If you put a Corsair SSD, it takes 14 seconds to erase, which is awesome. You can actually watch it, be there, and then it's gone. It's good, clean fun. I got some videos about it. There's some chats. If you connect to the machine via SSH, are the keystrokes for the command logged? If you are trying to catch SSH with a keylogger, then there are many ways to do it. You could have a hardware keylogger on the machine that has the hardware keyboard and catch it. You could have a software keylogger on that machine. You can also put a software keylogger at the other end, catching the data after it's decrypted, and I've done all of them. In fact, if you get the HoneyD honeypot, and there's some, I used to do this in a few other classes, you can make a fake, you make a special Trojan version of SSH that will steal the passwords when people connect. All you have to do is modify the source file and recompile SSH so it makes an extra copy of the password. So you can catch it at any place. And of course, we've talked about SSDs here. SSDs are really important. And it's not simple, but the answer is if your SSD is on an old operating system or not well configured, then it's the same as a hard drive and the old files are still on there. If it's the latest version of everything, and this is even the latest version of Windows 7 that had this feature, so probably I think they all are running compatible versions now, there is garbage collection and almost everything you delete is gone, but not everything. It does take little, it only erases blocks of 640K, so there are some little fragments that don't get erased, but like 99% of it does get erased within a few seconds after deleting. These are very good questions. All right. So let's look at another one of these. And so you want to find a few infected machines on a large network. I don't know why the font has suddenly gotten really small on this thing, but there's always something.
Yeah, let's have a background is gray.
Yeah,
It's not colored in there.
I know. All right. So a live response, that's exactly the point. A live response will run a script that looks for certain registry keys or files or something. That's how you do it quickly. These other techniques are too slow for that. These other techniques are for making a permanent record of evidence that you can go to court with later. To find it fast, you do live response. All right. And so you find child porn on a machine. Now what should you do? What's that? None of that, of course, this is the big issue. Child porn is radioactive. You have to immediately stop your investigation, hand it over to the FBI. Whatever you were doing, it's over. This is why there's a fundamental rule in forensics and also tech support: never look at the images. You copy the images in a command line tool or something. Don't look at the images. Nothing good could come of that. There's people at Geek Squad stealing the images to make their own reservoir of stolen porn and getting in trouble. Nothing good can come from looking at the images. It's invading somebody's privacy, and you don't want to know. This happened to the dean of the Harvard Divinity School. He filled up his hard drive with porn, and then he called tech support to put in a bigger hard drive, and they saw all the porn. And then they told people, and he was now in big trouble because he was supposed to be running a Catholic divinity school. And this was considered inconsistent with his dignified position. And the thing, everyone got mad at him, but I would have got mad at the tech support. Why are you looking at the images? That is unprofessional. Anyway, so this, you learn, you never look at the images. Nothing good can come of this.
What year was your philosophy for that? 5 years ago?
Well, this happened, I think, about 8 years ago. It was a big scandal because he was so important and he got in big trouble. Anyway, all right, so your investigation will go to court and you need complete evidence. So what should you do? You need more than one. You need all of the RAM and all the hard drive, and you might want the live response too, although it's redundant, but you certainly need both of these. You need the whole hard drive and you need the whole RAM. That is the complete evidence. Then you've got everything you can know about that machine, and now you can give it to both sides, because it's not enough to just find what you think is important. If you go to court, you have to have the evidence, which is investigated by the plaintiff, and then a copy that's investigated by the defense. They will want to do a second independent analysis of the evidence to see if they find other things that you did not find. So you can't just say, I found this and that's the end of the story. You have to give them the whole image so they can independently verify your findings and see if you missed anything. Anyway. All right. And here's the last one. A jealous husband wants evidence for his wife's laptop. These are all from real cases. So what should you do? There you are. Good, good. That's, one of my students was in tech support, and the guy came and said, here's my wife's laptop. She's cheating on me. And he called me to ask me what to do. And I said, don't do that. You need her permission. This is not a country where wives are possessions of the husband, and he can give you permission to go on her laptop. She could sue you later. And he said, that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. So I just quoted him a really high price so he would go away. I said, well, that might not be the perfect response, but at least you didn't do it. You know, you need her permission to go on her machine. Anyway, that's all. You don't, and that's what, like you said, if your boss authorizes you to hack back, that's not okay, because your boss doesn't have the authority to let you hack somebody else. And the husband does not have the authority to let you invade the wife's laptop.
I choose the hard drive, this image. I thought it was,
yeah.
None of these mistake was a silly, answer. So basically, I kind of,
yeah, but if you do any of these, you're liable to be punished in court, because you don't have authorization of the owner to collect any of this information.
Unless it was a shared laptop.
Well, in that, in this case, the husband said, well, I have the administrator password because I'm the IT tech in the family, so it's okay. But that does not necessarily make it okay. You need to, and if it's a shared laptop, I think a lawyer would argue that you're only allowed to see the husband's files, not allowed to see the wife's files, not without her permission. You need a lawyer to tell you if it's okay. You're running a legal risk if you do any of these things. You may very well be violating her privacy, and she might be able to sue you. If you have some argument where you think it's okay, you need to talk to your lawyer and see if that argument is strong enough to justify what you're doing.
Well, the answer is you hire a private investigator.
Well, private investigators have exactly the same issue. The husband will say, break into my wife's apartment and see what's going on in there, and you'll have exactly the same issue.
Outside of the apartment.
Well, but again, you'll have some shared space, and there'll be some space that's perceived as private and not shared. And just same with cops. You'll have to justify in court that what you did was in fact justified, and someone could complain. What's that?
In public view. If
Yeah,
the
that sort of
stairs-
thing.
The stairs is
Yeah.
considered public view.
That's right. Things like public view, things that are behind some kind of password or something, you know, you get in a touchy place here. You can't just do it. You need to talk to a lawyer first, or you'll end up being sorry.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
This is not related to computer, it's related to drones.
Yeah.
If somebody were to fly a drone to your backyard, to your windows.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have the right to shoot it down here now?
There's a huge argument about this. When people started flying drones around, people in Texas started getting shotguns and blowing them away, and there was an argument. And I don't know where it all ended up. I do know a few things. If you own land, you don't own the sky above it. You only own like 20 feet up.
No.
So if they're more than 20 feet up, they're technically not on your land. And so there's no simple answer. You need to talk to lawyers.
So let me ask this.
Yeah.
I live on a house, basically my back window doors, it's all
Yeah.
glasses, right?
Yeah.
And drones fly to my house, like look at my glass doors and everything.
Yeah.
It's basically 5 feet from my glass walls.
Yeah.
That's going to my living rooms.
Yeah. So
It's
you,
not part of
if,
the standard view. I thought it'd be illegal, right?
well, see, if
It's
a drone
see.
flies onto your porch and looks in your window, then they're invading your privacy, and you could sue them for invading your privacy.
But
However,
I don't have no idea who that is.
that's true. You might not be able to shoot the drone down, though they might be able to prosecute you for breaking the drone. However, I suppose you could capture the drone and then try to track it back. I don't know the simple answers. These are complicated issues.
This happened to me on September 4th. I was watching TV in my living room, and my walls was all glass, and the curtain was on. I was on the second floor.
Yeah.
I noticed there was somebody flying a drone watching me.
Yeah, in that case, I think they have committed a crime of trespass or privacy invasion. But I don't think that means you're allowed to shoot the drone down. I think that would be another crime. But I'm not sure. You really need a lawyer to talk about
It's
this.
just basically like in my yards.
Now, if you were to
Actually, 5 feet from my wall.
yeah, but if you were to pull down the blinds to block the view, that would be certainly legal. But if you damage the drone, you're probably not justified. And this is why a similar issue is Find My iPhone. You turn on this feature, somebody steals your phone, you find it, now you want to kick in the door and steal it back. Well, you can't do that. It's not legal for you to kick in the door and steal it back, even though you know where it is. And so it's not really clear what good that Find My iPhone did for you. The only point is if you actually lost it in the seat cushion, then they'll tell you it's there. But there's a lot of these cases where this is why you end up with so much vigilante justice and so many frustrated people. There's a lot of cases where the apparent obvious solution, in fact, is yet another crime. And shooting it down would seem okay, but technically you aren't authorized to shoot it down. You're not allowed to destroy it just because it invaded your privacy. They did something rude, but you're not allowed to punish them with a punishment that suits you. You'd have to go to court and sue them, and then they pay a fine, but they don't necessarily get their drone destroyed as the punishment.
I mean, he's basically like, I'm watching TV on a sofa and it's
Oh, yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh, what the fuck?
Yeah, of course, now, if you're willing to not worry about taking some illegal risk, you could say, if I just stick out a butterfly net and steal the drone, he's probably not going to prosecute me because he'd have to admit he did a bad thing. But technically, you have committed another crime. And that's what Google did in China. China hacked them. So they hacked China and committed a crime too. But they said, I don't think China is going to press charges. And they got away with it. And that's why you have a lawyer. Lawyers can help you wade into the gray zone and make calculated judgments of whether you can perform an action that is to some extent illegal and whether you can reasonably expect to get away with it or explain it away.
I can have the same issue like so many times. Like my backyard used to have like a chicken wire fence.
Yeah.
Then I replaced it with a wooden board fences.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then it's like the start of it, There used to be some some guy with cameras, like they have a chicken wire fence, the cameras.
Yeah.
Flash shots, but I wasn't doing anything.
There's a lot of these issues. Anyway, let's see. Okay, Ignacio. Okay, Ignacio won again. He's one of the faces. And who's the other face? I got two faces.
It's a mystery now.
Oh, that's probably okay. That's good. That's a subtle. I'll assume that's Kate. Everything good. All right, good. So, and Ignacio is 6. All right.
Who's
That's
the issues?
He's a student online, but he's one of the faces, and he was a different name last time. Fair enough. So I've got some reason. All right, so I think that's it. I'm going to quit. We'll do the next section next time, and I'll have the next projects up tomorrow or the next day. All right, if there are any more questions, send them in. I'll just stop the share and stick around here if anybody wants help on projects. All right.